This is the full gospel for the Tampa Bay Churches of Christ with Minister Larry Williams, coming to you from 201 10th Avenue East in Bradenton, Florida. It's a great joy to be back with you on this great occasion. You are invited to our Sunday school at 9:30 a.m., worship 10:45 and then 5 p.m., Wednesday night class 7:30 p.m., Wednesday night AA class at 6 p.m., and then you're invited to the Manatee County Community Action Team meeting each second Saturday at 9 a.m. We bid you to watch the full gospel with Minister Larry Williams each Tuesday night, 10 p.m., Channel 77. And now let us go into our services for today. Today we will ask you to please turn with us to Proverbs chapter 17. Proverbs chapter 17. We want to talk briefly from the subject, excellence in a changing world. Excellence in a changing world. And we might start off by defining the word excellence. All we're saying is that we need wisdom in a changing world. There's so much happening about us. If we don't have wisdom, we're not going to be able to make it. So with that in mind, I would have you to turn with us to Proverbs chapter 17, looking at verse 27 and 28. In fact, we want to look at the whole chapter, Proverbs chapter 17. Well, verse 27, he that hath knowledge, spare his words, and a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips esteemeth a man of understanding. So just briefly today, we would emphasize the subject of excellence in a changing world. The book of Proverbs is a relevant book. It puts the daily work shoes on the law of Moses. Now furthermore, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 1 through verse number 12, and there are a sundries of things that we can learn that would help us to be better in the future than we have been in the past. When you look at this chapter, it says that a dry morsel that in peace is better than a house full of fasting where men are fighting. And it tells us in this few verses that a wise servant will ultimately rule a foolish son. And it tells us that God refines men like a furnace refines gold in silver. And it indicates to us that the children are the glory of their father as well as their grandfather. But also, we would ask you to look at Proverbs 17, verse 13, and through verse 28. And man is taught there that evil starts small, but it ends up being an ocean and that you cannot control. It indicates to us that justice in some societies are sold for the highest bidder. It also finally indicates that he that exalts his gates will ultimately come to ruin. And therefore the book of Proverbs is a relevant book in which it puts daily shoes on the law of Moses. And when we learn the book of Proverbs, then we will know how to walk at home, and we will know how to walk on the job, and we will know how to walk walk at pleasure. Why? Because we will take time to learn the book of our Proverbs. And excellence in a changing world. And y'all, you may disagree, but we live in a changing world. And economics all about us are all changing. And they just passed a week and created a free trade zone of the Americas. Well, many people are concerned that they will create sweatshops and they'll take away our jobs and take them down there and pay men at almost nothing to work. But we live in a changing world. And it was last week in that the Massachusetts and Supreme Court decided that it's all right for the same sex to marry. And we live in a changing world. Earthquakes are all about us, and death is upon us. And thus we live in a changing world. And I would say to you, and that many would agree, and with this, the scientists would say that the waters are getting hotter, and therefore will bring about much trouble. Philosophers agree with this, historians, but more than that, I would say to you today, and that the Bible agrees that this world that we live in, it is a changing world. Now look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5 in verse number 1. The world is a changing world. And not only do we say it, but the Bible says it. And for we know that if the earthly house of this tabernacle be dissolved, that we have a building of God, and not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And for verily in this we groan, longing to be closed upon with our habitation, which is from heaven. And if so be that being clothed, we should not be found naked. What is it saying? That this world that is changing. That in 2 Corinthians 4, in verse number 16 and through verse 18, wherefore we faint not, but though our outward man is decaying, and yet our inward man is renewed day by day. For our wrestling, which is for our light affliction, which is for a moment, and working for us a more and a more exceeding weight of glory. And while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. And for the things which are seen are all temporal, and but the things which are not seen, and they are eternal. Bible agrees and that this world is changing. And gray hair says that this world is changing. And we learn, beloved, as we grow in grace and in developing love and mercy, and that the world's all changes are not bad. And let me just say that again. That yes, we live in a changing world, but we learn that all changes are not bad. A wife's body change in order to produce a beautiful child. And that change, beloved, is not bad. The child, he changes in order that he may learn to talk. And all changes are not bad. A child changes in order to learn and to walk. A child changes in order to become a man. All changes are not bad in this world. And I like the fact that a sinner, that he must change in order and that life may be different for him. The sinner must die in order that he might be born again and into the kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Yes, we live in a changing world, but all changes are not bad. And thus we learn that as we grow and develop in grace and mercy, that all changes are not necessarily bad. Now, you know, there's one thing about us in life. We don't like changes. We just don't like changes. Well, how can we learn that all changes are not bad? Number one, we need to stop fighting changes in our lives and changes in our homes. And some of us, we are fighting gray hair. And let them alone. It ain't bad to have gray hair. In fact, it is a blessing. Some we are fighting our children growing up and leaving home. And we need to stop fighting changes. Why? Because all changes are not bad in life. And we are fighting sickness. All sickness is not bad, beloved. And we need to learn to stop fighting changes. And if we stop fighting changes, we need to learn to accept what they are. Y'all know so many of us, we are worried because we're fighting changes. We're worried. You never know. And this new trade zones may bring more popularity and more finance. You never know. Ages may bring you more money. And we need to accept changes in life. But you know the greatest thing in the world is for us is to accept who we are. And I ask you to look with me in James chapter 1 and verse 22. A lot of us, we are guilty of this. We look into the mirror and see who we are, and we walk away and say, no, that's not me. Well, what do we need to do? We got to accept changes. How do we do that? We got to stop fighting them. And we got to accept ourselves of who we are. In James chapter 1 and verse 22, the note of the Bible, but the doers of the word, but be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deluding yourselves. And for if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, and he's likened unto a man beholding his natural face in a mirror. And for he beholdeth himself, and goeth away, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he is. But he that looketh unto the perfect law, the law of liberty, and continue with, and being not a hearer that forgetteth, and but a doer that worketh, this man shall be blessed in his doing. Beloved, we need to accept who we are. So many of us, and we reject ourselves, and we walk away. And we need to use the changes that God has given us in this life for the betterment of our family, and for the betterment of ourselves, and for whatever we are. And I like David in Psalms 37 and verse 35, he used his changes for the betterment of God. And look what he says. He says, and I've been young, and now I'm old, and yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed beg for bread. In other words, and I'm an old man, and God has blessed me in my young years, and he has blessed me also in my old years. Changes are not all bad, but we got to stop fighting changes. We got to accept age, and we got to stop worrying about it. If it brings sickness, we're going to have to accept it. If we lose a job, we're going to have to accept it and look for another. And know that all changes are not bad in this world. Excellence in a changing world. Well, in excellence in a changing world is an understanding spirit, or the spirit of wisdom, the spirit of prudence. And we need men and women today that have understanding. A lot of people don't have understanding about the family, so they destroy their families. Don't have understanding about their children, so they destroy their children and drive them away from home and drive them away from God. And we need excellent spirits in this world that will make a difference in a changing world. What is an excellent spirit? Somebody with wisdom, somebody with understanding. Well, it is not knowledge or understanding. It's not knowledge about a car, but it's wisdom on how the car operates and how it works. To just have knowledge about a car doesn't mean anything. But you need the wisdom and the prudence how to drive an automobile and how to put it back together. Knowledge about mathematics is not enough, but we need the wisdom of how they work. Excellence in a changing world. Beloved, knowledge about God is not enough, but we need to know of God, how he works, how to approach God. Many people know about God, but they don't have any wisdom about him as to how he works and how to approach him. I ask you to look with me in Leviticus chapter 10. It is Nadab and Abihu, and they had knowledge about the Lord, but they didn't have the wisdom as to how to approach the Lord. And many people are the same today, and they know about God and about Christ, but wisdom about how to obey him and how to worship him, and they do not have. In Leviticus 10 in verse 1 and through verse number 4, Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, and took each of them his censer, that is, and each one of them they took their bowls, and then put fire therein, and laid incense thereupon. And so they put fire in the bowl, and they put the incense upon the fire. And you know what happened? Perfume goes up. Well, look then, it says, and offered strange fire before Jehovah, and which he had not commanded them. Well, they knew the Lord, and they knew to have a bowl, they knew to have incense, but they did not know that they should not offer strange fire unto the Lord. An excellent spirit is one of wisdom, of understanding God and understanding what God requires of us. And what happened to Nadab and Abihu? And because they did not have wisdom. In verse 2, and there came fire from before Jehovah and devoured them, and they died before Jehovah. Why? Because they knew God, but they didn't have wisdom about God, how to approach God, how to worship the God of heaven. And they came before him the wrong way. The excellent spirit in a changing world. An excellent in a changing world will teach you how to worship God and how to pray. And I remember long ago, and I knew that you were supposed to pray, but didn't know how to pray. And many today, and they are praying to hit the lottery, and they are praying to do things wrong. Not only do we need knowledge in this world, but we need excellence. And in this changing world, many individuals we need today an excellence about the New Testament church. A lot of people don't know what it's about. Don't know that it saves the soul. Don't know in Acts 2 verse 47, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church such as should be saved. And thus excellence in a changing world. It is an understanding spirit. That's what it is, an understanding spirit. That's what excellence is. Show me a man of an understanding spirit, and his home will be right. His life will be right. His finance will be right. A lot of us, we are in debt today. Bills are behind because we do not have an excellent spirit. Trying to spend more than what we have. There are some people in the Bible who had an excellent spirit. Gamaliel, a Pharisee, a doctor of the law. Remember what he said to Israel in Acts 5, verse 33 through 40. Remember the Sanhedrin was about to do him, the apostles. What's wrong? This man had an excellent spirit. He understood in a changing world. And in Acts 5, looking at verse 33 down through verse 40. But for the sake of time, we look at verse 37. After this, the man rose up of Judah. Well, in verse 30, we start at verse 34. And there stood up one in the council of the Pharisees named Gamaliel, a doctor of the law, had in honor of all of the people, and commanded to be put the men forth for a little while. Take the apostles, he said, forth for just a little while. And then he reasoned with Israel. Why did he reason? Because he had excellence. A lot of people do not reason today because they don't have excellence. Everybody ready to fight because he doesn't have wisdom. Everybody ready to take out his gun. Why? Because they don't have excellence. Well, in verse 35, and he said unto them, ye men of Israel, take heed to yourselves as touching these men and what ye are about to do. Well, they were about to kill the apostles because they preached Christ. In verse 36, and before those days, before these days arose up, remember Theudas gave himself off to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who were slain, and all as many as obeyed him was dispersed and scattered abroad. In verse 37, listen at wisdom. In verse 37, and after this, a man rose up by the name of Judas in Galilee in the days of in the enrollment, and he drew away some of the people after him. He also perished, and all as many as obeyed him and were scattered abroad. Look at wisdom in verse 38. And now I say unto you, refrain from these men and let them alone. And for if this counsel, refrain from these men and let them alone. And for if this counsel or all this work be of men, it will be overthrown. But if it be of God, and you will not be able to overthrow them, lest haply ye be found even fighting against God. Now, I ask you to read that, but here is a man of wisdom. Don't fight the apostles. Don't fight the teaching. For if they are of God, they're going to stand. And if they're not, they're going to fall. And if you fight them and they are of God, you'll fight against God.